So I put this together this morning, and one thing is missing is who is responsible for this. And besides me, there's Stefan Meyer, who is a colleague here from the management group, and Uri Gnisi from San Diego. And I asked you to log on and do the experiment. Some did, some did not. So I'll remind you what the experiment was, what the task was. So you were facing a screen with 25 doors, and you were told that if you have the right to open the door, you get $5 if it's one of 24 doors, and a penalty of 110 behind one of them. And to get there, to get the right to open the door, you got to bid an amount between 0 and 5, and the computer will also bid an amount between 0 and 5. And whoever bids higher pays the bid and gets the door. And that was the starting screen. And then once you do that, the first door was open, and you were left with 24 doors, 23 of which were of one kind and one was of the other, depending. And then you were asked to repeat this for 20 rounds. So those of you who haven't gone through the experience, is the experiment itself clear to you? Yeah, okay. So you start with 25 doors, and you move on. You open one, and then there are 24 doors, and you go on for, okay. Now, I assume that what you were struggling with, those of you who did that, there were two sources of uncertainty here. One is what's the computer up to when it bids against you? And the other one, where's the minus 110? And when you think about this, the question is, well, what can be known? And maybe something that can be learned, maybe by the computer's behavior. And then what changes as the game proceeds. So is the simple decision problem, is it a complicated one? Surely it's a simpler one than the one that you encounter in your everyday life and in your business life, but it turns out it's sufficiently complicated. Now, why did we choose to do this experiment? And we were inspired because it's sort of a metaphor about real life situations. And I want to go through 3 examples here. Global warming. Or first, before I talk about these 3 examples, we learn from experience, and the better models are the simpler ones in general. So let's think about global warming. If you'd put a thermometer outside this window here in the past 100 years on, let's say, October 4th at 1 p.m., and you recorded the temperature year in and year out, I don't think you would detect a pattern. You'd say there's no global warming. And that's a simple, straightforward model. To argue that there is global warming, you need a model that takes some information about the penguins in Argentina, about glaciers in Greenland, about the colors of the trees as they change now in Vermont. You put it together in a model that's not intuitive to most of us. You say, hey, look, here's a pattern we can discern. There's global warming. And with it, there's maybe a small probability of a huge damage to our civilization. I'll give you another example. Sovereign default in Europe. If you go back to look at the price of bonds 7, 8, 10 years ago of countries that were using the euro, you would see no spreads across them. Italy and Germany were borrowing on exactly the same terms. And the inference is that the market thought that the probability of Italy defaulting was the same as the probability of Germany defaulting. And months went by, and the spread was the same. So again, there was a simple model would encourage you to maintain that Italy and Germany were the same as borrowers, had the same creditworthiness. Now, another example that was really the direct inspiration of this project is housing prices. If you were sitting in 2005, 2006, 2004, and you look back and say, are housing prices exaggerated? And you say, well, somebody could say maybe and make an argument, compare housing prices to rent or to what people earn, those who were living in the houses. But somebody else could say, look, I have a simple model like we have in the stock market, IID, independent, identical, distributed. It went up last year 5-7%. It's going up this year 5-7%. It went up 2 years ago by 10%. Hey, it can keep going up. In fact, we have a colleague who wrote a paper saying about that time that housing prices were right. So there's this tension. Yeah, there is a document like that. It's only right. So there's tension between simple models and inference from recent experience, simple-minded maybe, and complicated models. In general, complicated models one should stay away from, but sometimes maybe they are more powerful. Okay, I want to talk about the results of the experiments, and there'll be 3 sections of the results, and then what we've learned. One, you may recall that at the end of the experiment, I asked you to tell me what you did, why you did what you did. So I'll get a few quotes here. The second item is to what extent there was learning as people went along. And the third one is really the most important one. How did the bids adjust to the progression of the number of rounds? Okay, so there were 20 responses out of the people sitting here. So here are some of the explanations. I initially decided to go in at $1 per bid. After the first couple of rounds, I noticed the opponent is going in with a much higher bid. Hence, I bumped it up by a quarter to ensure my bid is competitive enough. Once I saw the opponent picked up the penalty, I'm sure I'm going to win this game without any issue. So, but all I can do is give you quotes. I don't know what this meant, what the person actually did, or I could see that I didn't. There's no way to know what the opponent's bid will be, what the opponents will bid. So just assume they will bid the highest possible, which is $4.99 to earn a profit. 1 and 2, maximize the winnings, but ensure I won the bid. Try to see pattern of how aggressive the opponent was being. So there's clearly an attempt to figure out what the opponent was up to, partly because I never said what was the strategy of the opponent. And I didn't do that just to keep things simple. The strategy itself was that the computer would pick a number, a uniform distributed between 0 and 5. It was really the most straightforward, the simplest strategy possible. And that was round in and round out. Misread the instructions. Thought I was supposed to lose a point. Okay. So that was that. As the probability of getting minus 110 increased, I'm less willing to take the chance of $5. So here's somebody who was thinking about how the game progresses over time and what it means that the number of doors behind which there's $5 is shrinking relative to the one door that's still there of the penalty. Use 2 bids, 3 and 2.51. Ideally, I should have used 2.51 consistently. I was lucky that the opponent won the 110 penalty. So somebody is generous with luck here. I calculated the expected value of the door given the probability of winning 5 or losing 110. After the third door, the expected value is already negative. I kept bidding low value, but at the end I decided to bid 0, expecting the penalty to show up. So this is actually very interesting, and I'll come back to this later. The bids. First, I want to show you how they depended on the previous round, whether a person won or lost to the computer. Okay? And then I'll show you the average bid sequence. So here's a chart of by round 1 through round 20, how people reacted to the previous round. This green is how people reacted if they won last time. The orange is how people reacted if they lost last time. So the pattern you see here is that they they reduce the bid if they won. The presumption is they felt like they overpaid. They increase the bid if they lost. That's it. In fact, let me show you a similar chart for another group that they did it on. This undergraduate is from Austin. And again, you see the exact same pattern here. It's somewhat clearer because it was a larger group. So if in the previous round the computer beat me, that's here, I'm going to increase the weight bid. If in the previous round I beat the computer, I overpaid, I'm going to reduce my bid. So that's one thing. Now, let's come to the heart of the experiment, which is how did people bid? And remember, the last comment that was made, the person said that by the third round, the expected value of a door was 0. What he didn't say was that, but I'm sure he or she actually did the calculation, because in the subsequent round, the expected value was negative. And yet, this person he said that it was negative. And then he said, I kept bidding low value. Why do you bid anything if in your eyes the thing is it's worse than worthless? It has negative value. So this is a person with an analytic approach, as you could tell from the other comments. They want to learn intuitively rather than sit down and do calculations here. And indeed, and I apologize for this color. Some of the computer produced them, and I didn't know how to change that. But first of all, this green. This green is the expected value behind the door, depending on the round, assuming that the penalty has not shown up. All these results are up to the point where the penalty showed up. So what you see is in round 1, it's a few cents. Round 2 is fewer cents. Round 3 is 0. And from here on, it goes negative, and very negative. On the other hand, the brown here is the average bid. And what you see is, true, the average bid did go down with the round, but from here on, it should have been 0. And it certainly did not go down as dramatically as this curve goes down. This is the important result. And why is it so relevant? To some extent, it's a metaphor for real life, that we tend to maybe take a simple model. So the simple model was, let's see what the computer did last time, and now we'll react to that, ignoring the analytics of the situation. And presumably underlying that was a growing confidence that the bad door would not show up, even though the story itself told you in your face, look, the more good doors are open, the more likely is the bad door to show up. So maybe you can see the analogy with warnings regarding global warming, regarding housing prices a few years ago. So here, and this is distinct from Taleb's point in the Black Swan. Taleb's point in the Black Swan is we neglect small probabilities with big consequences, but we don't see those probabilities. We don't calculate them. Here it was all, here's so many doors. You can count them. You were told what the doors were, how many doors were there. You didn't even have to count. But at the same time, it wasn't like people behaving thoughtlessly. They were reacting to what was going on last night. It wasn't that people just clicked on on various entries, or you had to put numbers there. You couldn't just click and went on. No, the people showed some reaction, some energies there. And I hope, maybe, this is sort of an ambitious bullet point that maybe it's a question how bubbles start, that people think thoughtlessly about certain situations. So that's all I want to tell you about this. Thank you.